We're doing part 2. Let's get started here. All right, so first, let's go over our checklist on what we're going to be doing today. So that way people aren't wondering, well, what are we all doing here? One, we're going to go over a premise. That's going to be the premise of the story that's taking place inside of this dungeon. Once you have a premise, then it's easier to assign what each room is, right? Then once you've assigned the room, it's easier to tell what details to put in each room, whether a room is directly tied to a story or not. We can also do our basic encounters. What kind of enemies would we be fighting in this dungeon? Where would you be placing them? And then how would I add stuff to the environment to make the encounter more interesting? And then, of course, we'll do our boss encounter. We will choose our largest room. We'll tie into the premise, that boss room. And of course, we're going to make as much interesting things in the environment in that room to make the combat interesting, especially when you're fighting a boss. You want to make it more fascinating. So there's our checklist for today. Let's first go over the premise. This is what I came up with when I was going over the dungeon. The idea is simple. A buried dwarven magma forge has reactivated after centuries. Its ancient defense system meant to protect the forge core has gone absolutely haywire. Now the entire complex is locking down, burning intruders, and something inside is forcing the system to stay active. So a dormant mechanism within this dungeon has gone haywire, and something is doing that inside. So we're going to go over each room and break that down. Heyo, Trent J. Moore, glad that you're here, by the way. Ang Tang Whistle, awesome. A lot of my favorite people already here. Love to see it. All right, let's go ahead and go over that. So what I'll do next is, whenever you're having a hard time figuring out what types of rooms there are 5 ones that generally I lean on. These are not the only ones, but these are the most general ones that I have. And the first one is a guard room. And a guard room would be a room where an encounter takes place. And if it's a guard room, that means it's guarding something. So when you have a guard room, you maybe want to put in a chest, some important clue. Maybe one of the guards has a key on them. Maybe the guard knows a spell to unlock another area. So in a guard room, you're going to have 2 important things. One, enemies to encounter, and something that they're guarding. So that's why guard rooms are important. And generally, I usually have one in every single dungeon. 2, there's also puzzle rooms. Puzzle rooms are a room where it's got some kind of puzzle. And the best type of puzzles are always the ones that are tied into the environment itself. So if there's a fire dungeon, then the puzzle itself should be fire-oriented. There's also trap rooms. And a trap room is simple. It's a room where there are traps. And just like puzzle rooms, the best type of traps are the ones that are built into the environment itself. There's also maze rooms. And there's also boss rooms. There's also entrances and exits, but I usually have those separate. And then also I want to mention that an individual room doesn't have to have one dedicated theme. You could have a room that could be a mix between a trap and a maze. It could be a puzzle room and a guard room where you're solving a puzzle but also fighting enemies. It can be a mix of these other types. Don't ever limit a room to just one type. It could be a mix of any of these 5 that you see here, or what other ones you can come up with. There is a lot of different types of rooms that you can come up with, but these are the common ones that I generally see. And so now that I kind of have the different types of rooms, I can start assigning each room using some annotation. What I recommend that you do is that you create a new layer with the Add Layer button and make it an object layer. If you're not familiar with what an object layer is, it's the layer that's going to have that tower on it. If you look in the right layer panel, you see it has this tower here. All right, and then you're going to relabel that object layer Annotation. If you don't know how to rename, just right click, it'll have rename. It's the first thing, or you can just double click and you can change that to Annotation. That annotation layer is where you can put all your text. And the way that I go about this is simple. I start with the main room, the entrance, and I'll make my way through each one, knowing the premise as if I was the players walking through, and then I annotate it. So what I did is I started by just labeling the 2 rooms that are the most obvious. That's the entrance and the exit. After I labeled those 2, I made my way upward into this first room right here, and I'm going to have an encounter take place. And the reason why the encounter is important is because I want to introduce the enemy types within the first room or the second room outside of the entrance, so that players get an idea of what they're going to be encountering enemy-wise. So whether or not they need, after facing hopefully a very successful encounter, they'll now have some ideas about the enemies, what spells work best, at least slowly beginning to strategize strategies that makes it easier to take out those enemies. So that's why my first room outside of the entrance is going to include an encounter. All right, so we're going to have that first room be an encounter. I also have these what's called fire traps, and what it is it's a series of fire beams or blades of fire that go across this little opening right here, and those cannot be crossed without either using some kind of magic of some kind or going over to your fire trap mechanism in this main room here. Once your players get to here, they'll be able to control, using this wheel right here, all the different fire traps. So they'll be able to unlock certain regions or certain areas within the dungeon by taking control of the fire trap mechanism. But as always, your players are going to be creative and resourceful. They might not go directly to that fire mechanism. They might end up having a spell of some kind or some enchantment or some way of going through those fire traps. So always make it so where there's more than one way for your players to do anything. I never try to limit them into one action. There should always be multiple ways. And players are, of course, always unpredictable. Now, if you are going to put a fire trap in a room, then there should be something important in that room, right? Why else would it be blocked off with a trap like this? If it was just a room where you would just did a regular encounter or there was nothing important, then there's no point to put a fire trap that blocks off the entrance to this room here. And the reason why I put that fire trap there is because there's a chest here. And the chest could be a couple of things. It could be a spell or an item that protects players from fire. It could be a clue to what happened to the dungeon. It could be a journal entry from a dwarf that died. It could be a letter from some dwarfling to the dwarf king, kind of mentioning what happened here. Any of those things. So the chest is going to be something important that's either going to push the story forward or help them get through the dungeon a little bit easier. This is generally how I generally go about it. Is there stutters in the stream? Sorry to hear that. Maybe maybe our bit rate is not so high. It seems to be okay right now. Sorry about that. All right, so in that room 2, there's going to be a chest here, and the chest is going to have important information to it, right? Whatever it's going to be in the chest, it needs to pertain to the story, the main premise, and how players proceed forward into the next areas. Now, I have another fire trap right here as well that's blocked off. Now, I did set it up to where your players can go up through here and get into this area over here. So there's another way. I generally try to have more than one way to get to an area. It generally works better that way, in my opinion. So they can either deactivate the fire trap or make their way up into this next room where there'll be an encounter. And what I'll end up doing here, actually what I should do is go to room 3 here first, because we just did 2. But room 3 is similar to room 2. It also has a fire trap here. That's why I have a lock here. There's going to also be a chest in here. This will also push us forward. You can include encounters in these rooms if you want. Maybe a simple, small, like fire demon or lava creature that comes out of this molten lava part right here. Maybe the enemies seep their way out. My suggestion for enemies is to always make sure that they kind of fit with the theme of the map. Because it's a lava dungeon, it could be like some kind of lava slug, floating fireballs, a demon, some kind of lava spirit, whatever kind of enemy that you want to use, homebrewed or used from some tabletop system. It's up to you. It doesn't really matter. It works either way. You can decide which ones, but I generally try to make sure that my enemies are pertinent to the dungeon that you're in. It would be weird to have ice elementals in a fire dungeon, right? That would be odd. So when you're thinking about enemies, think about the theme and the premise of the story before you start putting together your monster tokens, your statting, and all that stuff, and your creatures that you pick. I also recommend that your first encounter right here, that you try not to overdo it. Your first encounter should have a certain level of difficulty, but it shouldn't be super difficult. As you keep going further and further through each room, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can bump up the difficulty by adding more creatures or adding a higher level creature. I generally try not to have the first battle, the first encounter, be incredibly difficult. The first encounter should be simple enough, easy enough for your players to win, and then strategize tactics for how to defeat other enemies. And that way, when there's more of them, like maybe 4 or 5 enemies, then that way it'll be easier to take them down now that you've formed these strategies. So as you're kind of moving your way forward, you'll change the mechanism in which encounters take place. So on top of that, we also have this other encounter room, and we'll go over the different type, what kind of encounter we'll put in here. And then we'll also have our boss room, which is completely cut off by 3 fire traps. So it might not be possible for players to actually use a spell or enchantment of some kind to go through fire traps, and only one. So they would have to take control of this fire trap mechanism, and then make their way into the boss room. And the idea that I had for the boss room is we're going to have the whole thing made of lava, and then we'll put rocks or platforms for players to walk across, run across, jump across, to make the combat more interesting. And what I was thinking is we could fill the whole thing with lava and then make a ring of rocks. And then that way your players have some space to move and maneuver around, while also avoiding some lava creature that's coming out of in the center where the ring of rocks is. So that will be the general idea there. And then we'll also have another room that will have info. And of course, with a boss room, there should always be some kind of reward. You've just defeated a big bad guy of some kind. There should be an reward of some kind. You can put a reward in this little small room right here, like a giant chest, or you can put it here in the exit if you want. It's up to you. But when defeating a large or difficult enemy, even smaller encounters, I generally try to create some kind of reward for my players instead of them going through this difficult task of defeating an enemy and not feeling like they achieved or got anything for it. And we'll also go over how to add minions as well to your boss room to make the combat more interesting. So we'll go over that. So we'll start first with our entrance. I think most of the info is here. You get the idea how most of it's coming together. So I'll turn off my annotation, and we'll start in our first room. As you know, there's a layer called walls, which is the black fill with the cliff or the line bricks here. We're going to go down to objects. Remember, we created that, so all the objects should be below the black fill beneath this shape right here. So that way everything should stay below the walls and not have this overlapping, which is going to be important. So let's start first with our entrance here. And what I might consider doing is putting in maybe a corpse of a dwarf of some kind. It is a dwarven dungeon, so it makes sense. And we're going to want to set like the scale properly. The way that I set it up is this is 5 feet right here. So we can go ahead and just place our character right, just to get the scale right. This looks about right here. This is set to 50, so I can kind of remember that. And what I'll do is I'll maybe place a corpse, maybe either right here or over here somewhere. And then when your players see that corpse over there, they might go over to the corpse, ask it questions. Maybe there's a letter, and if they're dead, then there might be something on its person. You know, players are always going to raid every corpse that they find. So it's a great place to lay a note, a letter, something that's going to inform the players what they're going to expect. I'll also bring that brightness down a little bit, put them in the corner. Players are going to come through this entrance right here and make their way over to this piece right here. And they're already encountering some environmental difficulty right here with this molten lava here. So without a spell, they'll have to make their way around and then go over to this dwarf over here and either raid the body, the corpse. If it's already alive, then they might end up doing mercy killing and still take everything from it. You know how players are brutal, and it makes it more fun, right? So we'll put a corpse here. This way players can kind of interact with that. And we mentioned this in part 1. If you're ever curious about what to populate in a room that doesn't have to be necessarily details, you can always throw in crates and barrels. They're great things to throw into a room that don't have to be necessarily important to the plot, but they're still environmental elements players can work with. They can grab a crate and throw it at an enemy. They can break the crate to see if there's supplies in it, maybe some candles for seeing, maybe it could be some spells, whatever it might be. Throwing in a chest or two crate is a great thing to throw them in. So I'll throw in a series of crates in the corners here. That would be good. Always a nice choice. Rocks and pebbles are all the way. Absolutely. We can throw in that. Like, let's say that you wanted to have maybe a collapsed segment in the wall. Let's do that. Let's go to walls here, and you notice that there is this segment right here. This right here looks like a line. Why don't we have some fun? Let's go to the line tool here. We'll go to portals. We'll create a portal right here. And then we'll go into the catalog and type in rubble. Someone said stones, and I love that. Stubbles and rocks. And then what I'll do is go back down to objects, and I'll go ahead and place some rubble. Actually, you know what? Let's put it on the wall. That might be a better choice. Let's go and put the rubble on the wall like this. And of course, what I would recommend is turn off your shadows and bring the brightness down quite a bit. And once you bring the brightness down, it will look like there's more of a collapse part in that wall right there. So now your players have a little collapsed part of the wall right here. They can walk over to here, either talk with or braid whatever is on the body there that's going to be helpful. So you always have that little bit of collapse here. If you're going to have a little bit of rubble right there, then it doesn't hurt to maybe throw in some smaller rubble. My recommendation would be to go over to your brush tool, go into the catalog, type in rocks, and you'll see that there's some of these cave rocks right here. Why don't we bring the scale down nice and small? And then we'll also bring the brightness down on them as well. So if you go to tweak colors right here, I know people get confused and they go right here where it goes with, this is the different types of them. You have textures, color, and erase. Don't let that be confused with this right here, tweak colors. And then I can bring that brightness down, make it pretty dark. And then I can go in to my background layer and just kind of paint in a little bit of these dark stones like this, just to get a little bit more environmental feel to it. So now you have some darker stones right there. That turns out quite well. Okay, I think overall this room looks pretty good. The more details you can add are crates and barrels. Maybe you want to put a letter or a note if it's a corpse on the ground next to it. Maybe you want to maybe put burn marks on the body, maybe to kind of show like, hey, to give you an idea what might have killed it, and that gives you an idea of what to expect. So you could put like maybe some burning ash on it. If you type in burning like this, you'll see that there's some of this burning ash right here. Why don't we place that objects right here, and then just place maybe some burning ash just right there on top like this, just a little bit like that. And then maybe what killed them. And then why don't we actually bring the brightness down to make it look a little more charred? There we go. That looks good. Let's also desaturate just a little bit. There we go. Now we have a little bit of like burning embers on the corpse. And then what killed this person might have been this molten lava right here, or this molten kind of rock lava texture right here, or it might have been killed by some kind of lava or dirt creature of some kind. So now we have an idea to let players know like, hey, this is what you're going to expect. And since they're dead, maybe we can put like a letter or a note or something on them. Okay, so I think the entrance room is pretty filled out. We might want to consider bringing the brightness down a little bit on these crates right here. So that looks good. And now we have a general idea here. We can kind of move our way into the next section. So we'll go up into room 1 here. And I mentioned that there was going to be an encounter in here. So let's go over how I would approach that. One of the first things I would do is, if you're going to have an encounter, you want to have things that the players can interact with. Great thing to interact with is to throw a big rock on the ground. There's a big rock right here. We can just use this. We'll type in rock right here. Rocks are a good choice. I even see a space right here for kind of a rock to fit right here. This might be a good choice. We can fit a rock right there. Let's flip it. We can probably fit a rock right there. That looks good. Let's also bring the brightness down just a little bit. We'll desaturate a little bit. There we go. Let's also change the shadow. Our light source is kind of coming from this piece, right? Coming from this lava right here. So why don't we use object shadows to have the shadow be emanating or projecting away from that? Let's go a little bit more this way, get a little bit more of the offset. There we go. That looks good. Let's bring the size up a little bit. There we go. So we have a rock there. So now players can do this if they need to. They can now go like this. They can go around this rock right here. So they can hide behind this rock right here. If enemies are over here, they can jump on top of the rock and do an attack of some kind. Like you can jump on top of the rock. They can push the rock onto an enemy of some kind. So having a rock, especially in this type of dungeon, makes sense. And of course, where you have a big rock, it might not hurt to add a smaller rock as well. So why don't we take that same rock texture that we used? Let's go ahead and bring the brightness back up. There we go. Let's go ahead and desaturate, and I'll just throw a little bit of rocks just right here. Wherever you have big rocks, small rocks, you have all types of rocks. So we'll use a bunch of these. Let's also use maybe these smaller ones right here. Let's throw in a couple of these. These are big enough. So I'll place a couple like right here. Let's also put another one, maybe. Let's put another big rock. This one right here looks good. Maybe we'll place that right here like this. That looks good. There we go. And then we'll have that shadow project away from the light source. There we go. That looks good. Okay. And there should be room as well for players to maneuver. So there's room around the rock here to move around. There's also room right here for players to move around. So those things are going to be important here. So we have those rocks there. Let's go ahead and throw some of these, maybe some more smaller rocks. Just line them around. Throw one there. Maybe one in this corner. One right here. One right there. There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and bring the brightness down a little bit on that one. There we go. Okay, that looks good. All right. Now that that's set up, now we have some things for your players to interact, move around with. Now the combat won't seem kind of boring because now the environment is a little bit more intriguing and interesting to work with, right? They can pick up one of these rocks, throw it at an enemy, maybe slow it down, or maybe they can throw the rock to distract them so that they'll go to where the noise comes from. A lunge attack off the top of the rocks. Maybe the enemy shoot fireballs and you have cover now from these rocks. All kinds of things. So the environment plays a huge role in encounters. And what I was thinking, there would be some kind of like lava creature that would come out of these molten, where the fire is right here. They would seep out of the cracks and then come and then attack your enemies. So wherever you see this, I also want to create this sense of paranoia for the players. Whenever they see one of this type of texture with the light and everything, they're going to say, oh, there's an enemy that's going to come out in any second. So your players will always be on guard, giving you an idea. Okay, let's keep going. All right, let's go ahead and add those fire traps. And if you type in trap in here like this, you'll notice that there are these fire traps right here, this fire beam. We're going to use these fire beams right here to block off our door here. And in fact, why don't we use put it on the wall layer. So I'll put one right here like this. So there's one fire trap right there, and I'll copy and paste and put another one right here. Remember we talked about that. Check my annotations right here. Fire trap, fire trap. So I've got my annotation correct with the fire traps. I've set up my encounter in this area, so that's good. That all works out very well. Next, let's go ahead and put in our chest as well. So we'll type in some kind of chest. Let's use these kind of dwarven. These are wood crates. Let's go to crate right here, or right here you have these wooden crates. It's from Dwarves 2.0. These are perfect to use because they're already a dwarven theme. So they work out quite well. So let's go ahead and place a chest kind of strategically where we want. Maybe I can place it just like right here so players can actually see it through the trap right here. So when they're walking over here, they can see that there's a chest in there. So they should be able to see it. What I don't recommend is putting the chest in a very corner here somewhere where they can't see it, right? They won't be interested in going into that room if there's nothing interesting in there to get. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. So we'll go ahead and throw a chest right in here like this. It's going to be an eye shot of the players wherever that fire is. Okay. All right. Here we go. And someone mentioned in their Maple maps, or maybe it was, do you ever find that when you are going through the stamps that you find one you weren't planning on that changes the story of the map you're making. Yes, that does happen, and that's okay. Sometimes it's for the better. That would, for me, this depends on how invested, like how much you've already done. If you've done most of the dungeon and then you found one thing that changed it all, I would just clone it as a new map and then make the change to that, but keep the original, because guess what? There's no point in going back on a ton of work if you're already 3/4 through it, but you found some breakthrough. My recommendation is it depends how far you are in the dungeon process. If you've already gone through so much, there's no point in doing that. All right, so let's keep going. That's a good question, by the way. I'm glad that you asked that. Let's also do that shadow direction trick. We should go to object shadows here, and we'll make the shadow be projecting from the closest fire source or light source right here. So now you have that nice chest. I'll even bring the brightness down just a little bit to get that darker wood. That looks good. Okay. And then now that our players can move through here, and if you want to show that that enemies do come out of here, you can throw another corpse in here somewhere if you want. That might also help. Like maybe you saw a corpse here, right here, and maybe that would give your players an idea about, oh, hey, there's some enemies in here. Maybe we can char them a little bit by bringing the brightness down and then adding some of that, some of the burning ash. So you could always give players an idea, like we did in the first one, what kind of enemies they're placing. So you can always do that. I think overall this room looks good. There's plenty of room, things to interact with. The one thing you might want to consider, of course, just topping it off with just a couple crates and a couple barrels. I can throw in a crate in this corner here, copy and paste. Maybe put some crates and barrels in this corner here. And in fact, because much of in here is kind of natural, why don't we throw something in the corner that's a little more unnatural? Maybe a statue of some kind, or maybe some kind of mechanism to show that there's a mechanism. So why don't we throw down some gears? I mean, this is a ancient dwarven lava forge, and there's going to be a lot of mechanisms and things like that. So why don't we try to show that by throwing in some gears and stuff. So I'll go ahead and bring the brightness down. I'll throw in a gear right here. Let's put in a smaller gear, kind of like that. And then maybe we'll put a smaller one. Actually, let's go put that smaller one over here like this. There we go. Connect those teeth. Put the next one here. Okay. And then what we'll also do is I'll also put a gear next to this door right here, because I want to show that there is a mechanism here. How will the players know that they can turn this fire beam, this beam of fire right here, if there isn't a mechanism to let them know they can do that? So by putting a gear right here and putting some gears next to those fire sections right here, that will give this players the idea that, hey, there's some kind of mechanism at work here. So that's super important, just to give players an idea like, oh, hey, I can deactivate this. There must be something in the dungeon that I can do to turn these off. So that works, as well as some mechanism here. So after that encounter, we'll move into this next room here. Let me go to my annotation. This is why annotation is so important. Now you know what's going to happen in each room. So another fire trap right here, apparently, and then another chest in this room. So let's go with that. So we'll turn our annotation off. We'll grab a chest again. Let's grab another chest. Let's make it a different one instead of the same one we had last time. So we'll grab maybe this design right here. Looks good. We'll throw a chest in here. And I want to place it again where players can probably see it. Otherwise, why would they go in there? So let's throw the chest right there. Just bring the brightness down. Let's again do that object shadow. So we'll project the shadow away from the flames like we did before. There we go. That looks good. And then we'll also take that same fire right here, copy, paste, and place that here like that. And then I'll go to the same mechanism right here, copy, paste, place that mechanism. We'll put a gear there and a gear here. There we go. So now we know that that mechanism is there. That looks good. And there's our chest. That's good. And of course, if you want your players to get a little bit more savvy with encounters, remember, you don't have to have a room that's specific to just encounters, just chests, just puzzles. You can always have any creature seeping out of these little lava rocks right here if they want to do extra way of protecting the chest besides just that fire mechanism right there. All right, so we'll move into that next room. We've got our chest in here, a chest in here, with our clear mechanisms here. When your players are walking through the dungeon here, they'll notice these gears and they'll realize, oh, hey, there is something to this. I just need to find the mechanism within the dungeon. So that's there, clear. Let's go ahead and keep going. Here, this is our main mechanism. We created this in our episode 1, but one thing that we didn't do that needs to be fixed is the floor is made of lava. So why don't we put something underneath for the players to walk on so that they can actually get to it and then actually rotate the gears to make it work. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'll do first is maybe we want to use some dwarven stamps. We're already have a dwarven theme. So why don't we type in dwarven and then we'll use some things to show the mechanism. So why don't we maybe put a platform at the bottom? We'll put that underneath. So maybe there's a platform right here that players can walk onto, or at least where this thing sits and rests. And then we can also take one of these stairs right here. We can copy and paste that, and we'll turn off that blend mode. We'll change it to normal. And then we'll go ahead and place some of these stairs. I'll go ahead and change the saturation. Push this down, copy and paste again. And let's go ahead and put this down a layer. There we go. Okay. And now you have stairs that lead down to this piece right here. If you don't like that, we can also just desaturate it like this. The red kind of blends in, so I kind of like it. So what I'll do is I'll go with that. So now one of your players has to go through this little hot molten section right here, goes down these stairs, and then they can go in here and rotate the wheel. What also might be important is to show that this is the mechanism. So why don't we actually have some fire maybe coming out of the eyeballs of the statue as well? So that this way it makes it clear like, oh, hey, this mechanism was what controls that. So I'll copy and paste and put some beams right here. Why don't we actually make them just a little bit smaller? Let's go with maybe that size. I don't want it to attack the enemies, but let's go ahead and put copy and paste. And this should make it very clear to your players. This is where the fire mechanism is, right? Because we're using the same stamp for this fire beam right here. We're going to put on that statue, and now it will be very clear that this is what this mechanism does. Okay, so that's going to be super important. All right, and then of course within this room, me personally, I would have encounters that take place in this room, and the adding in encounters in this room might indicate to the players that there's something important in this room. So what might be good is you can have maybe a creature come out of this fire pit or this little area right here. They can have an area right here, and that way they can converge on the players. And then that way there's this sense of guarding something, right? Something important. So always important to have that. So since this mechanism is so important and creates access to rooms that you can't get to without magic, then it might be important to guard that room. So I would have small level minions in here, maybe a bunch of them. And that way your players can kind of get the necessary experience they need, the tactics necessary to when they move on to the boss. So that's kind of super important. Yet can't go wrong with a method. Absolutely. Okay. All right. I think overall this room looks good. Let's go back to our annotation so that we can get an idea of where we're going here. That's room 5. Let's go to room 4. We'll also put an encounter in here. But what I think I'll do this time is I'll have the encounter be with a stronger enemy. Not necessarily the boss room, but maybe a higher minion of some kind. And maybe this will be important because this maybe the strategy for defeating this higher end minion will give you insights into how to defeat the boss. So the smaller minions will have a different strategy for your players to defeat, but this upper or higher level minion in this room 4 will give the insight the characters need for coming up with a strategy to defeat the boss, so that way it's not too easy. I like a level of difficulty and challenge is super important. Me personally, I try to be as cruel as possible. I am unforgiving. I am cruel to my players, and I do it on purpose because they'll thank you later for it. You know, when I first started, my biggest struggles were making it too easy. My players would keep telling me, oh, this was an easy battle. I didn't even take any damage. No, be brutal. Be difficult. Don't make it easy. Make it challenging. Obviously, you don't want to necessarily kill your players, but you want to make it fun and challenging. All right, so in this room, that is where our a larger enemy will come out, and maybe it'd be interesting. Maybe a bunch of smaller enemies combine into a larger lava creature to make that mini boss. That would be kind of cool. So maybe like 3 or 4 come out of this section right here, and then you tell the players, the DM tells the players about how these 4 things connect into a larger, more humanoid, dragon-like creature of some kind. And that will add a little bit more challenge and difficulty because you've already dealt with lower end minions in encounter in room 1, maybe a couple within the chest here and a couple within this room here. So bump the difficulty, add a new enemy. Instead of your players always having to fight the same type of minions, they're going to get bored that way. So definitely go ahead and spice it up that way. And then I'm going to throw a couple things in this room that players can interact with. Like I already added in these stones right here. Let's not do the exact same thing in that encounter. Why don't we throw down like a pillar of some kind? Maybe a pillar fell down. A pillar that was holding up the wall. And a pillar is a great thing to interact with. Just like those rocks right here, it's something that your players can hide behind for cover. If you've got a barbarian who's really strong, they can pick up that pillar and throw it at the enemy. Maybe it will cause the creature to break down into 4 creatures again, making it easier to kill. Maybe that's the idea. You want to keep doing enough damage to where they'll break into multiple pieces, and then your players can defeat it more easily. So that'll be important. Why don't we throw in this piece maybe right... I kind of like it right here. This is a nice location. Let's put it there. I'll also kind of desaturate, bring the brightness down a little bit. And then, of course, I want to do the object shadow. So the light is projecting away, projecting the shadow away. So we'll put some shadows there like this. In fact, why don't we bump up the shadow size? That looks good. That looks good. Okay, so now we have this nice pillar that they can interact with. Why don't we also throw in one more pillar? Okay. Oh, yeah, it's a good question about specific encounters versus random encounter tables. Honestly, that depends on the size of the dungeon. If your dungeon is massive, then you might want to put a little bit of random into your encounters. If your dungeon is small, like this one, you notice I've only got just maybe a dozen rooms here, not even that. And so it's okay. You can actually put more time as a DM into making those encounters a little bit, putting a little bit more thought into it. But if your dungeon is huge, guess what? It's going to be hard to hand tailor every single encounter that's going to take place in that massive dungeon. So what I would do is I would do kind of a random encounter instead, or have specific encounters to maybe specific rooms. So it really depends to me on the size of the dungeon. This is a small one. I'm going to put probably a little bit more thought into each encounter instead of just doing a random encounter. This is just my opinion. Every DM does it differently, but that would be my approach, because for me, whenever I want to do something on any map or for any encounter, I always ask myself, how much time do I have? If I have a lot of time, then it's okay to maybe put a little bit more effort and thought into the encounters. If you're short on time, then maybe you don't have the time to go through all of those. So it's all about the size of the dungeon, how much time that you have. This has always been my approach, but it's not the only approach, just to let you know. It's a great question, by the way. I'm glad you asked that, Trent. Okay, let's keep going. I think this room is good. I don't need to add a whole lot in here. I just want to throw in enough for players to kind of interact with to make it more interesting. So for sure, I'll just throw that in there, and then maybe even a couple crates. Always good to throw in a crate or two. And then maybe there's some much needed supplies. Remember, if you're fighting an enemy of some kind, this is considered a mini boss, then it's good to throw some kind of reward. You could throw in a chest in this room, maybe put a chest where these crates are, or maybe there's some much important healing potions inside of those crates right there. It needs to be some kind of reward. It must be worth it for the players to want to go in here, fight this major creature right here, and defeat them. Otherwise, what's the point of having the encounter there, right? Players want to be rewarded when they defeat enemies, whether it's levels, whether it's they learn a new spell, whether it's they get a chest, whether they can pull things off the corpse of the enemies they defeated. There should always be some kind of reward. So how do you indicate to yourself what encounter you put where on a separate document? Well, what I would do is I would use the annotation. So notice that I have my annotation here on a separate document, Word document, or whatever document you want. I would have a list of rooms starting with the entrance all the way down to the exit. And then in the encounter, room 1, in my list of rooms, I would place the information about the encounter. What kind of creatures are in there, how many, the levels, all that information. So I always have a separate doc, or you can always use the notes, the built-in note system right here as well. I sometimes use the note system as well. So you can put notes down as well. That's up to you. It just depends. Sometimes people don't like the built-in note system, so they don't use it and they just use their own outside of the tool. And that's okay. Honestly, I'm a big advocate for making the note system a little bit more robust. But that's always been my approach, is you'll have the annotations section on the map as a separate layer, and then either in a separate doc or on the map itself, I'll put all my information either in a note or on some separate layer. Like in annotation, you could have another object layer called information or DM info, and then just put text on that layer kind of going over the information, just like I did here, right here. There's a little bit of information right here about this room. Same thing, encounter, and then the info that you want. That's my approach, and it works out fairly well for me. All right, so we've went over our annotation. We've got our next encounter here with the goodies, of course, some kind of reward. Because it was a harder enemy to defeat, a little bit more difficult, we're going to throw in a couple chests or a couple crates. It's going to have necessary items like healing, protection of some kind against lava, or whatever it might be, something that's going to be important. I wouldn't make it something small. Make sure that the reward equals the level of difficulty of the encounter, right? You wouldn't create a small common potion for defeating a big boss, right? You would want to give them something important when you're fighting. So the reward should be equivalent to the difficulty of the fight. The harder the fight, the better the reward. The easier the fight, the lesser the reward. That's generally my approach to it. I also struggle with giving the rewards. Honestly, the way that I approach it is it should be important to the main premise of the story. So things like protection against fire, wards of some kind, items that grant you immunity to something, maybe something that's going to help you to defeat the boss in the end. Maybe there's like a frozen, maybe like some kind of weapon that creates ice so that you can use that to weaken the enemy to make it easier to defeat them. Necessary healing potions because they've gone through all this combat and they're feeling a little low on health after doing so much combat. So filling up a crate with like a whole bunch of healing potions of some kind, anything like that. So just remember, it depends. The difficulty determines the reward type, right? So just kind of remember that when you're doing that. So we've already got our fire trap and we've gone over the mechanism. For me personally, I would just have it be to, if the players just rotated a certain number of clicks, then it will, some of the traps will turn off and on. Honestly, I would have it to where it's not every single one of these fire traps gets deactivated when you rotate it once. It's possible that they need to do a certain number of clicks or a certain number of rotations for each one to open up, or maybe it's set on a system to where this degree or angle of the wheel would determine opening up the fire traps that are going horizontally, and then maybe rotating it the other way might open up fire traps that are vertical, right? So I'm going to come up with some kind of system, and that way it's easy for players to figure out. The way that you can kind of do that is you could put a fire, you could have it to where when the fire is facing this way, where the thing is facing that way, all fire traps facing like this will open up. If you rotate it to where the flame of the eyes is facing this way or like this, then all traps like that will open up that way. Or you can make it more complex. It's really up to you. I try to keep it fairly simple because in the past, when I tried to overcomplicate or complicate a mechanism, it confused my players to the point where they lost interest. So when you are putting together a mechanism, make it simple enough that your players can figure it out. This is not to be insulting, but I always just try to make things, dumb things down for my players. So that way they're not doing all the guesswork so much. Because what I end up happening is they just get bored. They don't care about solving the puzzle anymore because the difficulty level is too great. So when you are putting together a mechanism, make it simple enough for them to figure out. And what I would recommend is you can have maybe off of the corpses that you find, maybe there is maybe these are dwarves, are engineers, and on each corpse there is ripped pieces of paper that tells you the combination to the thing. So if you place some strategically placed corpse throughout the map, and I would put a couple of them, maybe one here, one over here maybe, and then another one within this area right here, and then on each one you'll have a security or some kind of information that tells you how to use the mechanism, right? That will be kind of important. Because your players will always raid a corpse. I mean, always. It doesn't matter. They will take the clothes right after a child. They don't care. Your players are going to be brutal, and that's okay. So, great place to put things is right on the body. Yes, they will be doing a lot of random things. And if your players are kind of going off into the random, it might be because your plot hook and what you're doing might not be strong enough to hook them in. So it's always important to kind of gauge your players' interests. For me personally, I tried to make things mostly obvious, but not too obvious. Some players will catch on more than others, and they'll help the players along the way. Players will always kind of work together to kind of solve problems in always the most craziest of ways. Like you could just use a corpse and throw it through the fire trap, and hopefully you can get through the fire trap behind the corpse. So your players are always going to be trying to do things creatively. So always kind of keep that in mind here. All right, let's go back to annotation. We've got what we wanted here. Maybe we could throw in just a couple more of the corpses. We mentioned having some way of determining how to figure out the mechanism. So I'll go ahead and throw a corpse down, one right there, and then I'll throw another one in this room like I had mentioned earlier. Let's have them maybe being on the stairs, kind of making their way up this way. There you go. So now you have these three corpses that are going to have the necessary information to use the fire mechanism. That'll be important. That'll be good. Let's go ahead and turn off our annotation. There's a little open room right here, so we could either have an enemy that comes out, or we can put in some necessary crates and barrels, put them maybe in the far corner here. It could be necessary supplies. It could be important information. In fact, we could throw something else in here to make it more interesting. Why don't we also, let's go into our dwarves stuff. We're going to focus, since it's a dwarven, we can kind of go into our dwarf pack here and throw in some stuff. Why don't we throw in some statues and stuff like that to make it more interesting? For instance, there's this undone statue right here. Why don't we place that undone statue up against the wall? Maybe there's some important information on the statue. Maybe it will tell you about the creator of the forge. Maybe this is the main architect of the forge. Maybe there's an inscription on the stone plinth that the statue is on top of. Maybe that inscription will give you necessary information. So throwing a statue with an inscription on it would be a good idea. Remember I mentioned there's going to be info there. Yeah, I love all the comments in the chat. Yes, share any ideas. Share all of the stuff that you use. I love it. Be as interactive in the chat as possible. I want to know how you all approach dungeons, because my approach is not the only one, and I'm not the greatest DM in the world. There are a lot of great DMs out there, and I'm still learning every day. All right, so let's go back to my annotation here, and if I remember correctly, there were some fire traps right here. So why don't we go over to my walls, and we'll go ahead and copy and paste these fire traps. Let's go to my annotation. And you know what I'll do is I'll just bring the opacity down a little bit so I can see it better. And then I'll go ahead and just place my fire traps like this. I want them to be big enough to where players can not get around them somehow. So I'll copy and paste, put one there. I'll copy and paste and flip one this way like this. There we go. Okay, that looks good. And I'll go ahead and turn my annotation off. Let's go back to layer options, 100%, and I'll just hide that. And you'll see that I have these flames right here. So these traps right here, and just like before, we should take our mechanisms here. We should go to objects and grab or maybe it was on the walls. Let me see here. Objects. There we go. Let's go ahead and grab this. Okay, and I'll go ahead and place my gears just like I did before. I'll place a gear right here and a gear right there. And then I'll copy and paste and do the same thing to this one right here. Some gears right there, and then I'll copy, paste, and do it again right here like this. Okay, to make it clear that that mechanism is there, right? Remember, the players need to see those mechanisms so that they understand, right? So there we have our mechanism there. And then, of course, they're all facing the same way. You notice that they're all going vertical instead of horizontal. So if the statue is rotated to where the fire coming out of the eyes is vertical, then it should open up those pieces right there. Or you can have it to where it's on a time mechanism, which is always fun to do. You can have it to where once you rotate it, it'll automatically rotate back to its original position, turning it into a timed event. And that means that your players might have a certain amount of time to quickly dash their way through here and get through those fire beams right there, and then go into the boss room here, and that will make sure, and then of course those flames might turn back on. So your players are now trapped in this room until they defeat the enemy, and then maybe the flame will deactivate. So why don't we take another flame right here. I did not put a flame right here in my annotations, just so you know, right here. See how I did not add a fire trap? I'm going to add it there so that this way players can't retreat from the room. So I'll put another fire trap there. And maybe this one gets deactivated after they defeat the enemy themselves. So we'll put another one right there. I think that's a good idea. And now that we're in this boss room, we now need to create a boss room that's going to be epic, right? The boss room will make it bigger because the boss is bigger, so there should be more room. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and choose a lava texture. And I'm just going to go ahead and just fill up this entire room with as much kind of lava as possible. So this whole room is going to be just completely covered with this whole bit of lava. That's perfect. And then what I'll do here, I'm going to go ahead and just delete these rocks right here. These aren't going to be necessary. So I'll just go ahead and delete all of these that I can that I don't need. Go ahead and delete that. And then I'll keep this rock right here. So in the center here is where this lava-like creature, is going to be coming out of. Okay, so I'll go ahead and throw a rock right here. Let's put a rock in this corner right here. Let's go ahead and place another rock right here in this corner. Let's put it right there like this. Let's go right here. Let's put it right here like this. There we go. Let's put another one in this corner. Let me see which one would work best. This one might work. Let's go ahead and put one in this corner right here like this. And then I'll create a couple more. Let's put one. Is this the same as this one? No. Let's put one there. That looks good. And I'm just going to keep adding a bunch more. There we go. Let me see here. Let's go put them more in a ring. Like this. That looks good. Let's put one right here like this. There we go. Now we're kind of creating a ring here. And what I'll do is I don't want them to be all the same size. So I'll try to rotate them, try to make some a little bit smaller than the others. By this point, your players should have some kind of spell or something to protect them from the intense heat. Of course, in reality, they would completely burn up being so close. Thank goodness it's fantasy. But of course, if you're going to have this extreme environment, you need to have something that's going to protect them. Spells, runes, enchantments, an item that they have that protects them, whatever it might be, to at least protect them from the burn, the heat of the lava itself, let alone falling into it. So this is kind of important. This is where you have that reality versus fantasy type of element. And me personally, the fantasy element is the fact that you would just be in here at all, because there's no way you would survive being inside of this room without some kind of fantastical element to protect you. So definitely I'll be throwing in these stones here. So now your players should be able to hop in between these rocks, and in that way they can attack the enemy that might be coming out and attacking them. The way that I would set up a boss battle like this is simple. You might have some kind of fire creature that goes under the lava, who lives under the lava, and then when they come out, they might do an attack, and the attack might happen on any one of these rocks right here. Maybe after a certain amount of damage to the players. I like to do phased encounters myself with bosses. I know that's might not be popular with some people, but I like to do phases. And the way that I'll set up my phases is simple. In the first one, what I'll have before you fight the boss is you'll fight some smaller level minions. And then as they start to lose, those minions will come together and create a much larger lava creature in the second phase after fighting those minions. After that, you can set up a series of attacks that might give your players some challenge. For instance, there might be an AoE, an area of an attack, where it affects every single stone. So some kind of splash attack where maybe the enemy beats down on the lava and it shoots this big splash of lava. You have to use some form of defense mechanisms, magic or something to defend yourself if it attacks a large area. You can also have individual attacks where the boss might just attack one area, one rock area, or they might take control of the rock and submerge it under the lava, and then the players have to hop onto other rocks while that rock submerges. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but the best approaches, in my opinion, especially with a boss battle, is the environment itself should play a role in the encounter, right? Whether it's rocks that come in and out of the water, whether the creatures are coming out of the lava and attacking. There might be lava coming from the ceiling and spilling down on the rocks. All these different approaches to how you want to go about the combat. I always go with phases myself, right? The first phase, smaller minions. You know that they're going to coagulate or come together into a larger creature, phase 2. And then in phase 3, you could have it to where there's a series of attacks, right? The large area of attack or individual rock attacks, the rocks submerging underwater or under the lava. Or you can have a phase where the creature goes under the lava and then a bunch of minions come out and attack, and then they submerge back in the water and then recreate the main creature again. So there's a lot of approaches, and this is the creature that is kind of overpowering the system, right? It's what's causing all of these traps to get activated, lava to spill out into the dungeon, killing creatures. So this lava-like creature is what's causing all this chaos in this dungeon. So lots of fun stuff that you can do here. They could pick up a rock and throw it at you, right? There's all these things that they can do. You could even throw maybe a summoning circle in the center to give your players an idea of like, oh, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. Let's type in summon here, and we can maybe go to click Inkarnate tag, and we could even take one of these summoning circles right here, and then maybe place one in the water in like this to make it a little bit more interesting. We could even change that blend mode. Maybe we want to go to like lighten. We can also go to screen. Let's go with lighten. I think that looks good. And now we have this very clear like summoning circle that makes it pop out more, looks a little bit more interesting. Maybe from that summoning circle is where the enemies, maybe each one of these little circles in the summoning circle represents a phase of the battle. Who knows, right? But that summoning circle kind of creates a central piece, and also you framed it with rock, so it's good to put something in the center there. So now we have that put together, and then once they've defeated that enemy, this fire trap right here should deactivate, and they should come into here, and there's things that you could put in here. We could put a giant chest in there. Why don't we give multiple chests instead of one? They've had a difficult fight, so let's put maybe let's put a couple smaller chests in here, and then we'll place a bigger one just right here like this, a real big one. And then in there might be all kinds of goodies. It could be powerful weapons. It could be powerful spells for some of your players. It could be important equipment. It could be any number of things. But after you've defeated the main boss, there should be a large reward. And I would usually mix it in with a bunch of things. It could be both treasure for spending power, for money to buy things, more equipment, better equipment. It could include equipment itself, items, spells, whatever it might be. Whatever you do, whatever's in those chests, it should be equivalent to the challenge that the players just did. Because it was a boss, it should be something very, very important. So just kind of keep that in mind. So overall, where are we at for time here? 401, perfect. It's been an hour and we've done most of the stuff here. We could throw in a couple more details in each room. Like we could throw in more rubble. Right now, there's not a lot of details in the room. So why don't we do that last bit and just throw in the last bit of details that's going to take place. So what I'll do is I'll maybe take some rubble. Remember that rubble trick that we did? So I'll grab some rubble here and maybe put it in this corner right here. That's always a good choice. I'll bring the brightness down, put a little bit of rubble there. Let's go and put a little bit more rubble somewhere else. It never hurts to put down rubble. Rubble. Always a nice choice. What are those smaller rocks? Let's go to those. Where did those go? These smaller ones are perfect. Let's turn off those shadows. Let's go ahead and put some smaller rocks right here like this. Let's put some smaller rocks in here as well. Remember, if you don't know what to put in details, small rocks, crates, barrels, all nice choices. I see there's some empty space here, so let's put some rocks in there. Some rocks in here. We want to get those details in there. Put in a couple rocks in here, just to put in those details. Same thing, we'll use a texture as well. We'll throw in some rock texture here, just kind of paint it in there. That looks good. There's a lot of rubble here, so let's go ahead and paint in all that rubble there. That looks good. Let's go ahead and paint in a little bit here. A little bit right there. Put some rubble inside of here, There we go. That looks good. Tons of rubble. That looks good. Okay. And then what we could also do is we could also put a light source on top of where these flames are right here. So I'll go ahead and place a light source. Let's copy, paste, go to walls. And I'll go ahead and just paste that light source right on top of those flames, just to create that extra light as you would kind of expect. So I'll do that. There. Okay, here as well. This looks good. Okay, let me just take a look. Yep, everything's there. That looks good. Chests, got that. Okay, let's go ahead and add in just a couple more things. Let's talk about filters. Now, because the way that I decide filters is by looking over the map and looking at some of the dominant colors that already exist in the map. And there are two dominant colors that I see in here, or really three. And one is a neutral color, which is the grays. A gray is a neutral color. That's why that red and yellow work so well with the gray, because it's a neutral color, and any color will work well with a neutral color. But because there is a lot of reds and yellows, it makes sense that we might want to consider a color filter that will accentuate that red. Because it's a lava dungeon, why don't we go into add layer in the right layer panel, go to filter layer, and then we'll choose red sky, okay? Now I'll show you what the red sky looks like at 100%. You see what the red sky does? It begins to add a little bit of red to the dungeon, which is what you would expect, right? The dominant color of the dungeon is red. So a red sky filter would work well. Let's say that it was a watery dungeon. Then a better one to use might be winter or overcast, which has more of a bluish color to it, right? So you can use color filters to accentuate the already existing color scheme on the map. So here's what it looks like without the filter. Then when I apply that red sky to it, it adds that red as you would expect because of all the red fire and the flames that take place. So always a good choice to throw in a color filter that will accentuate what's already the color scheme on your map. There are a couple other things you could do as well. Sometimes filter layers have a way of diminishing shadows. So a good choice is to go to another filter layer and then go over to color adjustment filters. And then from here, you can bump up your contrast like this. You can even bump up your brightness a little bit more. There's a lot of flames in here, so why don't we bump that contrast? Why don't we also bump up the saturation to get more of that deep reddish color, really causing it to pop out? What about also throwing some grit and grime on the ground? Why don't we also throw in another filter? But let's put that filter below the objects and put it only on the background itself. So if I select the background brush layer, then if I go to add layer, go to filter layer, I'll go to texture filters right here, plus, then go into the catalog here. Oopsie, I'm sorry, wrong one. Filter right here, go in. We're gonna go over to click Inkarnate at the top here, and there should be a filter called from Fantasy World called Old Paper. Now I'm gonna go ahead and turn that now because it's because this filter is from a different style, it doesn't have the presets for the blend mode, but the proper blend mode is overlay, right? So I set overlay. Now see what happens when I turn off this old paper filter here. In fact, why don't we actually bump it up a little bit more? Full power here. Let's also go to repeat. There we go. Now let me turn off old paper. And you can see the difference that old paper does, right? Old paper starts throwing in some scratchy, dark elements over here. It throws in some grain a little bit, making the ground a little bit more gritty, a little bit dirtier, and a little bit more interesting. So again, let me zoom a little bit in a little bit and then turn off that filter, and you can see the difference that it does, right? What it does is it adds that grime and filth that you would expect from a dungeon like this, with all the scarring and burn damage, collapses, the dirt and the grime. It's what you would expect in a dungeon like that. So another great filter to add in there is that one. So good choice there. And I think that's really all we need to add. I would add a lot of shadows and lighting to it, but the thing is there's so much lava in most of these that there isn't a whole lot of places for shadows. But if people want to see how I would approach adding a little bit of shadows, I would add the shadows in the small, singular, 5 wide sections where there's not a lot of light. So I would go to this. You would go ahead and go add a layer, go brush layer. Let's bring that brush layer all the way above all of the objects. Let's maybe put the brush layer in between the walls and in between the objects. So what will happen is this brush layer won't paint on the walls, but it will paint on everything below the walls. So we have that, and I'll relabel this to shadows. Oopsie, here we go. We'll call it shadows. There's not really a whole lot that we need here, but let's take a black color here. Let's bring the opacity down. Let's change the blend mode on the layer. So if I select that shadow layer and then go to layer options, let's change that blend mode to darken. There we go. And then I can bring the opacity down to around anywhere between 20 and 30. And then the places that I see the least amount of light are these really, really tight areas right here. So there's already a light source here. There's already a light source here. So you would probably expect a little bit of shadow going this way in that corner and a little bit of shadow going this way right here as well, making that corridor a little bit darker as you would expect. Same thing here. There's a little bit of a light source here. So let's go ahead and put a little bit of shadow right here. That makes sense. Let's go over here. There's a little bit of dark right here. So let's go ahead and paint a little bit of shadow right here. Definitely right here, because this is where you have another corridor that's kind of dark. That makes sense. Here as well, add a little bit of dark, a little bit of shadow right in this corner right here. That looks good. We'll put a little bit of shadow right in this corner and that corner there. That makes total sense. Yes, this is Mati. This is me. I am Mati. Let's also put a little bit of shadow right here as well. And then a little bit of shadow in this room right here as well, because there is a light source further away. So let's add those shadows. A little bit of shadow here as well. All right, let me just take a step back. We can put a little bit of shadow right there. That looks good. Let me see where else. You know what? Let's accentuate more of the shadow of these rocks. So let's put a shadow like right here, like this, and we'll even paint a little bit on the sides. That looks good. We'll paint a little bit of shadow right here as well, projecting away from the fire as we showed before. Same thing here. We have a light source here, so let's paint a little bit of extra shadow right there. That looks good. And then we'll paint a little bit of shadow behind the chest, as you would expect. Same thing here, a little bit of shadow there. Some shadows where these are right here. That looks good. Right where the statue is. Behind the statue, would expect a little bit of shadow there. That looks good. Let me just take a step back and see how these shadows turned out. Yeah, I think overall, those are the best places. But overall, the dungeon comes together. We've set a premise. We've assigned a role or a purpose to each room. That role or purpose defines what we're going to populate it with stamps. After doing that, we also covered encounters, my approach to encounters, the rewards that you might give with those encounters, and then also how to change up each room. Some have puzzles, some have traps. The best type of traps, as I mentioned, are always going to be environmental. In my opinion, they should blend in with the environment, of course. And of course, we also went with the main mechanism that controls all of those. We made sure to put important things in inaccessible areas. We set up a boss room that will be challenging for the players to do. They'll have to do a timed run to get through these 3 traps right here, which might be interesting. Players might get trapped in here and maybe they'll have to find a way to move this again or cast a spell to go through. Once they get to here, they'll have to jump. And in fact, why don't we actually move one of these rocks, move another rock right here underneath so that way they have a launch point. So now they can jump onto that rock or that rock and then move their way around. In fact, let's go ahead and throw in another rock so that way the jumps aren't completely impossible. So I'll put a smaller stepping stone right there so that players can actually jump realistically across to that rock there. The other thing I recommend is let's have some interaction with the lava real quick. Let's change the shadow to yellow like this. So we'll have this yellow shadow. We're going to go with 0 offset, bring the blur out a little bit more, bring the intensity up. And now you have this nice yellow glow with the rocks that makes it look like the lava is interacting with the rocks, and right? Because that way it looks like it's interacting. So adding that yellow shadow. The only thing you don't want to do is don't add that yellow shadow to an area where there's no lava, right? You add it to an area where there is lava so that way it interacts with the lava. So those object shadows are very helpful to put that together. Oh, thanks, by the way, Fulham. I appreciate it. Appreciate you very, very much. All right. Well, I think that's it. The only other thing I think that I would recommend adding is sparks. Let's create a filter layer that is in between the walls and the objects. We'll go into texture filter here. We'll open this up and then we'll go into the catalog here. And if you go to Sci-Fi Battle Maps and then type in sparks, there's a spark texture here. Let me go ahead and make sure it's all the way up. And let's move that sparks above the shadow layer. There we go. That looks good. And you'll notice that there are now these yellow sparks that are floating around. And you would expect that, right? There's fire and flame everywhere. So those sparks right there make a lot of sense. And I put them to where they're not above the walls, right? It would be weird if there were sparks going through the walls. So I put those sparks, that shadow, that filter spark layer in between objects and walls, again, to make sure the filter does not have those sparks in those black regions, which are meant to represent solid areas. So that spark is also a great choice. But I think overall this dungeon turned out really well. It's gritty. It looks incredibly dangerous. Also, fire dungeons are popular. Red is a passionate color. It really captures the eye. Just kind of a pro tip there. If you want your map to get more views on the Explore page or on Discord or whatever, a fire theme always seems to pull people in. I've noticed this in my perusing through the Explore page and people's profiles. Dungeons with red or any map with fire on it seems to pop out and is really catches the eyes of viewers. So just so you know, if you want to get a little more views on your profile, make a couple fire maps. Guarantee you it will get you a little bit more views. Or if you just want more commission, you want to show maps that show your skill, your ability. You have, maybe you're making maps for people as commission. Make a couple of these fire maps. They stick out and they really draw attention. So definitely remember that. All right. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. This was a lot of fun. We went over a little bit by about 16 minutes or so, but we would expect, it's always the second part of the dungeon process is definitely more challenging than the first part. Putting together the dungeon shape is easy with that technique that we showed you in part 1. The harder part is assigning each thing, assigning each room and adding the details. But the number one thing that will help you with that is to always create the main story hook and premise for that dungeon. And then that way it'll be easier for you to figure out all the rooms. If you don't have a premise first for the dungeon, it's going to be a lot harder because you're going to be trying to figure out how to stitch together all these rooms. If you have a main arching premise, then it's easier to stitch all the rooms' purposes together into that main arc. So super important, okay? All right, this was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed this. We will definitely be doing Overthinking dungeons like part 3 and 4, where we'll be making other types of dungeons. Like maybe we'll make a watery dungeon. We'll make a Fey dungeon, so that way you can see my approach to it. And that way, because just because I've showed you how to make an easy dungeon with lava doesn't mean that it might be as the same approach. You might use the same technique of using the shape and the lines, but you might want to go with a different type of outline, a different type of layout. So we'll go with a series that will do all different types of dungeons. I'm looking forward to that. And then on Friday, we have a stream where we'll show you how to import your hand-drawn map into the editor and then trace over that with the land tool, so that way you can import your map and trace over it. I know some people get asked me this a lot, how do I do that? And that one will be fun because I have to hand draw a map and then import it, and then I'll show you how to build a map on top of that. That will be a ton of fun. I'm looking forward to that, okay? Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate all of you for being here. Have a great Wednesday or Thursday, depending where you are in the world. Please stay safe and healthy, and merry map making. I'll see you all on Friday. Take care, everyone. Bye.